Good morning, everyone, and welcome to episode 7 of the Low Production Values Sphere podcast, which is shot from my terrorist hideout in Syria. And today we have a very special edition because I, the founder and CEO of Sphere, will be interviewing the founder and CEO of Sphere. It's actually true, but he made a very smart choice, which is instead of going in an industry where it's impossible to make money, like media, he went into an industry where it's very, very difficult to make money, like semiconductors. We also have something else in common. My guest is French. His name is Steven Glinert. Oh no, wait, no, it's Steven Glinert. Is that it?
Yeah, the I is long for reasons that only an old Jew in Romania can tell you from 1880. If I went back in time, I'd ask him, but
Is that true? Is that because
it
joking aside, it sounds
no,
like
no,
a
no, no,
French name.
no. If you have my last name, you are related to me because it is a misspelling of a what I think we believe is an insult name. The Austro-Hungarian Empire. No, this is true. The Austro-Hungarian Empire needed to give Jews names, and they were moving fast through villages in Romania and Western Ukraine, and they probably came to my great 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 grandfather's village, and they saw a guy who had a frowny face, and they said Glauerer, Glunert, and then he didn't know how to spell the name he was assigned, so he was like Gleinert, and he also probably only knew how to spell in Hebrew, so Hebrew has no like Hebrew you write the vowels under the
Right.
word. So he just put the yud and the aleph at the bottom of the lamed, and my name is a one time. You have to be related to me. We know the guy who we're all related to.
And
It's
that's really
terrifying.
funny.
Yes,
That's
yes,
really funny.
yes.
So anyway, so I wanted to have you here because you're a very smart guy. We were introduced through the mysteries of internet group chats, but you write very perceptive things about national security, the semiconductor industry, and all that. So, give a quick bio. So you went to Stanford, which is okay. We forgive you. You had an AI company which was sold, I believe, and now we're not allowed to talk too much about your current company, but we are allowed to say that you make semiconductors and that you have clients in the national security space in the US. And like
Sure.
you make things in the real world and you sell them to actual customers.
Yes.
Correct.
So, yes, masters from Stanford. First company was acquired, sold software for manufacturing, moved into the real world to do hardware because I wanted to feel alive again and do something way harder. And I'm a masochist. Um, we don't fab ourselves. We are a fabless chip company. We fab with someone
Got
else,
it.
but we do the design. We basically clients who could be in the commercial space, but right now are dominated by the national security space. They give us specs they want. We produce. We go to another fab and we fab the chip we want. The only difference between us and everyone else is that we have AI to do the design, and that design is, and we focus in on very intensive chips that you mostly use for national security applications, though you might see them in cell phone towers or medical devices. Um, when we do a launch, we'll do a launch, and I'll go into more detail. But right now, that's about as much as I'm going to tell you.
Yeah, that's no, but that's enough for this podcast, which is for generalists. It's for policy professionals, which mean people who know nothing. That's not true. Um, but
People,
it's enough. No, but it's enough for
sure,
this to show that you're in the industry and you're actually like doing things inside that industry.
you can just do things.
Um, and so that makes you relevant for this podcast because of course the issue of semiconductor manufacturing is huge, and as you point out, maybe this is just me, but like for a very long time I thought semiconductors meant CPUs and GPUs. But of course, actually, everybody knows this. Computer chips, which are semiconductors, are everywhere, which is why, I was shocked to find out that hundreds of thousands of semiconductors are manufactured in France every year, which I didn't think. I thought they were all manufactured in Asia, but actually it makes sense because they go into the cars we make, they go into the missiles and the military stuff, but even
That's
apart from the military stuff.
but this
Yeah,
is
go
actually
ahead.
the point about France. Actually, ST Microelectronics, and this just
Yes.
shows you the diversity of semiconductors. France is not in the business, or the Benelux or Germany are not in the business of the intensive, what you might call low node CPUs or GPUs. They're not in that business. They don't do that. But because the world of semiconductors is so large, and because France and Italy and the Benelux have and Germany have such good physicists and sort of good material science, they have focused in on these very niche applications that are, you can call them niche, but they're massive. So automotive, industrial, you call them MEMS, so they're like sort of uh, mechanical chips. They're sort of so you use them for, like, remember the Nintendo Wii, the
Yeah.
sensor in the Nintendo Wii. That's a French product, actually. I think it's ST Microelectronics. They at least fab it, but a lot of analog, heavy duty
So
stuff
just to be
is done in
clear,
Europe.
fab means, so in the
Yes.
world of semiconductors, you have like a big sort of dichotomy, which is fabless and fab. Fab means fabrication. And so
Yes.
you have companies that just design chips and then other people make them. The most famous is ARM, I think.
No,
And
no.
then you have people who actually make the semiconductors.
So let's actually talk about the we let's get historical here.
Yeah,
Back in the
please.
day, there was no such thing as fabless and fab. The reason being is because the process of making the
Right.
chip was so intimately tied in to the design of the chip itself, and is that you couldn't really split one from the other. Something happened in the digital space that was actually a software advance that has also happened to an extent in the analog space, where we have ST Microelectronics or XFAB or NXP, which are these European companies we just mentioned, or analog devices, where you can separate out the design and the fabrication. This was a software advance. This was not a technological advance, and it has dominated the digital space, where the capital expenses are much, much higher, and has to an extent conquered the analog space, though not completely, which is to say that you often see things like in companies that are analog design shops, that some fabrication has been kept by them in shop. There's a lot of technical reasons that we can go into for this, but what you have to understand, that there was a software advance that allowed for, in digital we call it sort of synthesizability. That is to say, basically people figured out that you didn't need to actually lay out every goddamn transistor. You could abstract it away and create nice sort of uh, you basically only needed to think about the logic of the chip, not the sort of layout of the chip itself, which allowed for abstraction, which allowed for people to say, okay, now I can sort of efficiently separate out the fabrication and the design and specialize. And this was a groundbreaking thing. And it went from, if you wanted to be a chip company, you needed to have the capital available to fab, to suddenly people could specialize. And this was one of those grand moments in, well, let's
Right.
go ahead and do that.
So basically, instead of needing to build a factory to do a semiconductor company, you could just have like three nerds in their garage, and they would come up with a new design and they would send it to a factory, and so that helped the industry.
Yes. What it also does is it globalizes the industry extremely quickly.
Interesting.
What
Yeah, because now you can move the manufacturing to low wage countries, which leads us to no. Okay.
No.
No, take us through the history. This is
Let's be very
fascinating,
clear
and
here. Let's be
you
very clear
clearly
here.
know more about this stuff than me.
It's you can't do this. You can't do fabs in Bangladesh, right? You can do a lot of things in Bangladesh, but you can't make a fab. Fabs require an educated population. You don't have people on the factory floor like assembling things. It's an educated population that is has high numbers of engineers where the labor you see it in countries at the low end like Malaysia where you have um, good engineering schools and a good number of engineers, but it's a middle income country. I think it's this,
Right.
one of the wealthier countries in Southeast Asia. But you also see it in countries like South Korea, Taiwan, which are sort of they're not, and Singapore actually. They're up there, but they have one thing in common, actually, and that thing that they have in common is the ability and the willingness of the government to dump or allow for large capital expenses and outlays and to be put forward for what are extremely billions and billions of dollars expensive um, places. Singapore, uh, is a classic example of this. Uh,
So what
Singaporeans,
you're saying is they captured the market through
yes, yes.
industrial policy.
Yes, they capture the market through industrial policy. They realize the separation has happened and they capture the market and they say, Malaysian government says we're going to dump resources. The Singaporean government says
Right.
we're going to dump resources. The Taiwanese government says we're going to
But
dump
this,
resources.
but
Korea, Japan,
this
etc.
is an important point. Like a lot of semiconductors and advanced semiconductors, these are not T-shirts, right?
No,
Like
no, these are
they're
not.
made in rich countries, and like the issue is not cost of labor. It's not like T-shirts. Like T-shirts are never coming back to America. Like
No,
I did
that's not.
another interview with a reshoring specialist and says, look, a lot of stuff can come back, but T-shirts are not coming back. So these are not T-shirts.
These are not T-shirts. In fact, they are. This is the most insane, bizarre manufacturing process that you could possibly understand. We are taking a photo mask and blasting a laser onto
Yes, the science of it is
magnets.
actually fascinating. Yeah.
It's science. Then we're doing a chemical vapor deposition where we're basically using we're using sort of plasma to pull off layer by layer. Remember, semiconductors have like several 30 layers and many layers from many chips. The manufacturing is intense. The process engineering is intense, and the fact is that you need strong engineering talent in your country to be able to do this.
Right.
But the most important thing is you need governments that are willing to invest in it. And the moment that AMD, well, companies like AMD are a great example. I think it's AMD said the CEO says um, something like, "Real men have fabs." For a long time, this was mine, and he was basically Intel resisted this for a while. Intel still has resisted this. Actually, that's why they still have a fab. And that's why they're sort of the sort of the carrying the flag forward of American semiconductor fabrication. But Intel was the laggard. AMD gave up. They said, screw it. Like real men have fabs, but we're no longer real men. It's too goddamn profitable to go and fabricate it somewhere else. It's
Right.
too goddamn profitable to do so. And you see this over and over again with every semiconductor company where they just have a shareholder meeting and I can be in that room and they basically say, look, we're never going to have geopolitical instability. The Cold War's over and we can increase our margins by and lower the and lower our capital costs by an ungodly amount. Why the hell aren't we doing this as a shareholder in the company? I demand you do this. And it happened. And it happened over and over again. Countries where government capital was available, lower profits were allowed.
Okay, so let's just focus in on this because we're getting to the what happened part. So basically, 90s free trade, end of the Cold War, Fukuyama rules us all. And so on the one hand, you had the West where we're like, oh, yeah. So in the 90s, Fukuyama rules us all. Free trade is the order of the day. Western companies are told just maximize shareholder value, whatever gets the highest ROI is good. Meanwhile, East Asian countries are like, oh, the government in those countries are like, oh, if you want to build like a giant high tech factory, we will give you subsidies, low interest loans or whatever. So the Western companies were like, we're getting rid of this manufacturing, which is high capex, low margin, and the East Asian countries were like, yes, please, thank you.
Yeah, some companies make decisions, but let's be clear and specific here. Um, Many companies like NXP, ST Microelectronics, which are European ones, and then you have in the United States, you had Intel, and you have I think Analog Devices to an extent, Skyworks, et cetera, companies you probably haven't heard of, the very important chip companies. Corvo, for example, they make the decision, and they have continued to make the decision that fabrication, linking up their design and their fabrication, is important. Now, the reason why one might think this is one, you might say, I have some really good physicists. I have some really good physicists that have built really good transistors, and I don't want to share those transistors with the world. Right now, you have to understand that this is like, sorry. So you have companies that basically make a decision, in an important decision, like, my transistors are so good, my process is so good that I don't want to share it with the outside world. My process is my comparative advantage, and linking my design and my process together are something that
Right.
gives me an advantage. And they make a shareholder decision, I am 100% sure, that said, if we lose our fabrication, we lose our advantage.
Right. So
Analog,
yeah, this is an important point because this applies to manufacturing generally, which is this idea. Oh, we'll just design, and then other people will do the dirty, grubby work of making it. Actually, what you find out is that if you've got the design and the manufacturing in the same roof, they complement each other because the
yes,
people actually making the thing knock on the engineer's doors and say, "Oh, this doesn't work," or blah blah blah, blah. And this sort of process leads to a better product. I mean, this is true for cars, for example. This is true
yes.
in many places, and I would assume it's also true in semiconductors since the manufacturing is so complex. Like the more complex the manufacturing, the more you would expect to have this effect. Contra t-shirts once again, where
Sure.
like
But let's
every
make a
t-shirt is the
rational.
same.
Let's understand the rational decision making here. Company that does very, very, very complex digital chips sees that the as we go down in node size, as the transistors get smaller, the technology is getting way, way more expensive, and the capex is just starting to eat into everything. And you might say, "Damn, if I want to maintain my competitiveness in the digital world, I got to get rid of this fab. This fab is a disaster for me." Right? And so for them, the rational decision becomes Taiwan and China and invading Taiwan. And if I'm going to like, and Singapore is always going to be a U.S. ally, so I can package there. I can do my and I can fab in Taiwan, and these places are not going away. So I'm going to make this incredibly economically important decision to get rid of my fab. Companies like Corvo, who make heavy duty analog chips, make the decision that, one, my process is too intimately connected, and my capital costs aren't explosive. So whatever, we're gonna keep our fab together.
Oh, okay, so let me put on my libertarian hat.
Okay.
Uh, and so I've just listened to all of this. It's very interesting. And let's say I'm a libertarian. I say, well, what's the big issue here? Because what you're telling me is that you have various companies that are each making value maximizing decisions about what their competitive advantage is. And so, like, company A might be like, actually, I'm not that great at manufacturing, but I'm really good at design. So I'm going to sell the manufacturing and focus on design and be more profitable. This is good. And then another company is going to say, oh, actually, I'm really good at manufacturing, or the manufacturing is more integrated in my design. So I'm going to keep manufacturing. And this is also good. And it just sounds like a healthy market ecosystem that just where everybody's sort of like making their own sort of interest maximizing decision, and it works out at the level of the market or the country or the world to sort of create value for everybody, and that's good. So why is the libertarian wrong, and why are we having this discussion?
There's let's start and imagine a world in um that's not, what's the Hobbes phrase, cruel, let's imagine a world in which
Nasty, brutish, and short.
yeah, let's imagine a world in which it is not war of all versus all for a moment here. Allow
Right.
me that privilege. The problem is that this actually becomes what you might think of as a tragedy of the commons. If everyone makes the same goddamn decision, then suddenly a core competency that I have from a talent perspective evaporates overnight. Right
Right.
now, I can't get it back. Right. So if we all, if I don't know why, if like I don't like changing poopy diapers, but I need to know how to change a poopy diaper because I need to maintain that skill set, because if my wife is busy one day, like I no longer can change it. There's no one to change the poopy diaper. Poopy diaper in my 2-year-old is just there. Like we now have there's a terrible analogy, but it just came to my mind. The truth is, but the truth is that if we all move our
It's
fabs
it's a
overseas,
it's a very patriarchal and heteronormative
yeah,
analogy, which
yes,
we strongly condemn.
sure. But if everyone moves their fabs overseas, all of a sudden,
Yes,
then we don't have the talent base anymore. Then that process engineer who has been trained as a process engineer his whole life, he finds a job and then he leaves the workforce, and there's no one who's replacing them because there's no job for that applied physicist to do. He's going to go into software or quant trading or something like that. Whereas before, he might have a really highly paying job at a fab. By the way, these jobs are, this is not sweatshop labor. These people are paid
right,
200, 300K. Like these are uh, they get paid more than a Dropbox product manager. Dropbox product manager, I'll tell you that much.
right, right, right,
Um, but we all do it, and then we don't have the talent anymore, and then we lose an essential piece of what you might call a well-rounded economy.
right,
Even if even if we weren't in a national, even if we weren't in a situation of increasing multipolarity and geopolitical instability, this would have been a bad decision, and we should have done something to step in to
right,
stop it. Matters are made worse by the fact that Taiwan made a very intelligent decision that, and you have to remember that in the 80s and 90s, the existence of Taiwan as a country was something that most people assumed was an anachronism that would soon go away. That was what Kissinger thought. And then they pulled off an unbelievable miracle, and
right.
Morris Chang saved that country because he figured out that if you made it the center, and the government figured it out too. They were working together. If you made it the center of global chip fabrication, it became important again. It became relevant again, and that's they did. But Taiwan remains. I'm going to phrase this really well. Taiwan remains an anachronism in many ways, and it remains an area. There is a massive risk that we all must understand of Taiwan ceasing to be an independent country or a
Yes,
quasi independent country. And we all have to eat that risk now because China wants it back for many, many, many reasons that are not part of this, not pertinent to this podcast, but China wants it back. And there's a significant risk that it will get it back. And we
yes,
now must eat that risk because that's where it all went. More than that, the region of the world in which much of chip fabrication went happens to be a region of the world where there is a rising power that does not want US to have access to those markets
Yes.
potentially.
Okay, so we let all of the chip manufacturing go to Asia. That was a bad idea for many reasons. So, next episode, what are we doing about it? And I'm just gonna skip over the part of we need. No, actually, I do think it's interesting. Like, why do we need semiconductor manufacturing in the United States to defeat China? Why are it's a very basic question, but I like asking very basic questions. Why are semiconductors so important strategically? You made the point about diversifying the economy, and like fair enough,
It's not.
but why are they strategically important?
There's a few reasons. Number one, um, we need these things for every aspect of modern life, from doing this podcast to being able to do anything to, and
Right,
this is critical, to making missiles that work.
right,
Missiles are computers now. Every military device is a computer now. The AMD Ryzen, which is a military chip that I probably is on the F-35. I think it's on the F-35, is an unbelievable work of technology and one of the most complex chips of all time. And like that chip, we need that chip. And if that chip is being made in Taiwan, our military ability to produce a modern military is under threat and controlled in China's hands if they control the island. More than that, we need to be able to not let China have leverage over literally almost every productive part of our economy. That is an incredible threat that gives them leverage to do a lot more than ban NBA players who, say mean things. Like that's a lot of leverage for them to be able to have, and we don't want them to have that leverage because they're a hostile communist country.
right. And like to the libertarians, uh, giving communists power over your country is not libertarian.
Right, right,
Is not likely to lead to libertarian and liberty maximizing outcomes.
right. But more than that, so you need this thing here. We made a mistake. We need to course correct. We don't want them to have leverage over our economy. We don't want them to have the ability to cut things off. We don't want them to have the ability to, yeah, and we don't want them the ability to cut off our military. Right? This is just it's essential, and more than that. And I'm going to be very careful with my words for the next thing I say. While I do believe that a vigorous deterrence of China over Taiwan is extraordinarily important, and I truly think the Trump administration understands that. And being willing to really signal credibly that we will defend that island is incredibly important. The fact is that our leverage in any negotiation over the future of East Asia is hurt by the the inability for us to get our own fabrication capabilities. We are in a
Right,
tough spot. Our strategic optionality is limited by our inability to fabricate our own chips. And
right,
everyone knows this. They don't want to
right.
say it out loud. Actually, JD Vance, I think, has said it out loud. But Vivek has said it out loud. Actually, it's not JD Vance. Vivek has said it out loud, but he's the only one who says it out
Wrong
loud.
meritocrat.
Yeah, like one guy has said it out loud, but everyone knows it. What we therefore have to do is take a page out of the East Asian playbook and go ahead and do that sort of large capital investment ourselves,
Right,
whether it is through loans,
right.
whether it is through there's a lot of
Subsidies.
financial instruments that we can use. We can use instruments where some profits come back to the government, which I don't love because it really creates bad incentives. And we can use tariffs. We can force foreign firms to build here by basically saying if you don't build here, we'll tariff the goods. All these things are tools at our disposal that East Asian countries use for many, many years that we now have to use ourselves. And these are tried and true policy instruments. And it's just about the muscle, it's just about the
Right.
implementation. Um,
Okay, so this is the next episode. So we made this big mistake. We really, really, really need to correct it
right.
yesterday, preferably. What are we doing about it? So, I mean, I don't expect you to be an expert on the Chips Act or anything like that, but sort of broadly, what is happening at the moment, and then we'll go to the next question, which is, are we doing it right? And if not, what should we change? But like, walk us through what's been happening these past few years and what's happening now.
Yes. So um, the Chips Act basically has several components. It is a bit of an everything bagel of a bill. Um, it
Shocking. I'll tell you, as somebody who works in DC, that never happens. It's just
My next point is I will get to all the weird stuff that's in the bill that I hate. Um, but the truth is that the majority of the bill was about loans and direct subsidies and tax breaks to get companies to build fabs here. And we
right.
went
Fundamentally, we wrote a big check to TSMC and Samsung
and
to
Intel.
and Intel, okay, to build fabs in the US. Okay.
That is fundamentally what we did. I'm going to go back in time and talk about washing machines for a moment, if you don't
Okay.
mind. What we figured out we could do with LG is we can compel the United States, as the massive market that we are, we could compel people to put their factories here via tariffs under Trump, but
Right.
also via incentives. And we did it, and it
Oh,
worked.
I see the point about washing machines. You're talking about washing machine tariffs under Trump.
Yes. So under Trump, we did washing. Sorry, it was a little
Yeah,
roundabout.
no, but it's very important because it's like the pro tariff case study.
Yes.
So go ahead, explain.
Yes.
I
So
know what you're
basically,
talking about, but explain it.
what we have realized is that you can create an ecosystem for industries by forcing foreign firms from East Asia to drop a factory in our country, and it's a very it's a weird thing for the United States to be doing because you think of it as something we do to other people, we do with other people, but we force them. No, but I mean, we also have we have the wealthiest consumer market in the world, and we buy a lot of washing machines. So LG had to do it, right? The
Right.
tariffs were the forcing factor here. We can
Right.
talk about
So
tariffs.
basically, what happened with washing machine tariffs? So the free trade argument is if you put a tariff, the manufacturers will just pass it on to the consumer, and all you'll do is take money from consumers and not change anything. But what we found out with the washing machine tariffs under the Trump administration is that the U.S. market is so valuable that companies like LG and others prefer to eat the loss in profit to in order to keep their market share and keep their access to the
Yes,
to the
exactly,
US market, which is, again, like, this is like manna from heaven for the protectionists, because it's exactly what they want. The skeptical response is that, okay, you've got one case studies.
yeah,
you've
yeah,
got you've got one example. There are lots of every market has different competitive dynamics where firms could either make the decision to eat the loss to keep their market share, or say, like, screw this, I'm out of here. But it's the point is, it's at least possible for it to happen. It's possible for
exactly.
it to work out well.
Now, what we did, we told these chip companies that they needed to start building fabs here, and we're going to give them a lot of money to do it. We
Yes.
didn't apply tariffs in the way that I think Trump wants to, and we can get to the spread of options, the buffet of options we have that I think Trump might revise wisely or unwisely. We can assess that. It's a question. But what the Biden really did was he said loans, subsidies, whatever you want, put your fab here, and we'll get moving. And I think TSMC sort of read the writing on the wall, and they realized they had to do this in order to in order to probably continue to get U.S. protection in a lot of ways. Like, it was a
Yeah,
national
yeah, yeah. There was presumably some arm twisting, and I was told some things by some people. There was arm twisted, because
right.
obviously the Taiwanese government was not wild.
They're not wild about this, but they probably got their arms twisted a bit. Samsung, the Koreans had a lot more actually room for maneuver. Um, and the Koreans had a lot more room for maneuver, but they chose to do it. SK Hynix and several other Korean companies actually told us to shove off. Right? We tried to convince them, and they said, um, sorry, the regulations and the things we have to do, and the profit, like the sort of financial models we have to give the U.S. government, are things we don't want to do and we think are proprietary. Um, and actually, I mean, you could. This is literally a case of because of woke. Like, SK Hynix was like, this is too many regulations. We don't want to deal with this.
Okay,
Um,
so this is one of my questions. So if you go to like conservative websites about the Chips Act, what they'll tell you is, oh, it's not working because of woke, and what they mean is that basically those factories have to do DEI, and they have like gender quotas and hiring quotas, and they have to have like, you know, I'm making this up, but it's probably true. They have to have like breast pumping, facilities on site or whatever. Um, but at the same time, like the factories are, the building is on schedule or ahead of schedule. Maybe the schedule was fake so that you could announce 6 months later that you're ahead of schedule. I don't know. Like, okay, so that's a question I have that you might be able to answer. Like,
is it
is the
working? Let's. Is it working? Is a really
yes.
important question, and the answer is yes. With a deep breath, I say yes. It's a good
The
policy, and it's
answer
working.
is the answer is dot 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 yes.
Yes. Like, I with the biggest heaving sigh or whatever I can ever make, I say yes, it's working. But let's discuss like what's working and what's not. So
Okay.
we
Yes.
haven't mentioned the elephant in the room, which is Intel. Intel was the big winner here. Intel, and they have done everything in their power to undo their wins through horrific mismanagement, but they were the winner.
That's a classic Intel story.
Yes. I actually think Pat Gelsinger did a good job, and I think his board is really dumb. But Intel was the big winner of this bill, and everyone always complained, like, "Oh my God, Intel just kind of ran, kind of was like a bandit in Washington D.C." And there's an argument to be made for that, but they're also the American fab that we needed. Like, they're the only fab that's still American that does low node digital chips, and therefore they were a necessary ingredient because we can't just rely on foreign companies. It's just not feasible, not possible. Global Foundries is another player. They also got a lot of subsidies. You don't hear about them much. They do a lot of RF and analog chips. There's also, but they didn't get as much money. And really, the focus for the Chips Act is on low node digital. Other companies are getting money, but not as much, and there's good reasons for that, which I can go into if you're so interested. But
I mean, I have many questions, but I'm listening to you
let's keep going.
for
So
now.
Intel's making a lot of own goals, but they are making progress themselves. They're eventually going to figure it out. They're eventually going to split out the fab because they're too important to fail. And the United States is going to keep giving, and the United States is going to figure out a way to make them succeed. TSMC,
I'm just picturing everybody at the Cato Institute listening to this and like just banging their heads on their desk. And like I get it. Like, I mean, this is the sort of horrible thing we had in the 70s and 80s, where we had all these big companies that were essentially like, like a failing, an alcoholic failing to reform themselves, like coming to Congress cap in hand every 5 years saying, no, I promise this time it's the last time, I'm gonna pull myself together, and like takes, taxpayers were throwing money down an infinite pit for these totally incompetent companies, that and it was actually good for like private equity to buy these companies and like fire all the management and make them productive. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah, but
Intel is a company that's been failing in the marketplace for 15 years, and we've given them a bunch of money to build factories, and they're screwing it up. And it's like, well, they're too big to fail, so I guess we're going to give them more money. It's like, you know,
but you're right because, by the way, the solution for industrial policy is what Park Chung Hee did. Um, he just threw. I think Hyundai didn't. It was Hyundai doesn't want to produce cars, and he just takes the CEO of Hyundai and throws him in jail.
yeah.
And,
Well, we can't do that in America. Okay, they tried it
right,
with
sorry,
Elon, it didn't work. So you
right.
know,
But it would be funny if we tried. That would be the Trump has the opportunity to do
I
the
mean,
funniest possible.
under President Vance, the whole CEOs in jail theory, might have legs again. But for now,
We can't do that. But I want to answer your question about what's holding it back. Number one thing that's holding it back for TSMC is that I one thing you should know about, I think, the Taiwanese are really quite savvy when it comes to when it comes to business. And I have dealt with Taiwanese companies before, mostly at my last company. Um, they really made sure that the subsidies were about to start flowing before they put any real effort into TSMC fab, and they got what they wanted in the end. We got what we wanted. We strong armed them, and then they strong armed us. They got what they wanted, and then things have started working. So that's number one. Same with Samsung. These are how these companies work. It is a business culture that really is not a that is very dog eat dog, and they do not believe in the rising waters lift all ships. Intel is failing its way to success, and I'm pessimistic but optimistic in some sense. The things that are holding it back right now are there are clauses in the bill, and I think the biggest thing that's holding it back is there are clauses in the bill that are really cause for like profit take, like basically say you have to give back some profits to the government. People don't like that. It's causing this. It's a lot of disincentives. I understand why the government did it, but it's just I think it's fair to the taxpayer that like these companies don't just get take home all the profits. But I think within reasonable, like, yeah, you can't take the money and do dividends, right? Like, don't do that.
right?
But within that limit, and that's what they were worried about. It's a legitimate worry. Within that limit, you should be able to take your own profits home. That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
You're taking a risk. Um, Number one, that's number one. Number two, actually, are the owner's requirements to even get the money. A lot of that money isn't being distributed because the government makes you walk through an onerous financial, audit. They make you walk through an onerous, yes, a DEI audit, but a lot of it is labor. But DEI is it's an interesting thing to point to because it's a sort of a canary in the coal mine of stupidity. But like
That's a good way of putting it, actually.
but it's actually not the most significant thing. The biggest ones that were holding it back are environmental and labor.
Right.
So any democratic law is going to have a lot of environmental and labor red tape. Now, I've heard stories that the Biden administration, in its last dying days, lifted some of the environmental whatever
If they
around.
did, I'm not aware of it. It's
I've heard that,
possible, but
but I don't believe it. And we have to remember that there are two stages here. There's the what I make you do while you're building the fab. So how
if
much do
anything,
you
they've been piling up regulation on their way out. Like the stuff that's coming out. Like I haven't looked at semiconductor slash chips act stuff specifically, but like the stuff that's been coming out of the executive branch these past few weeks in terms of regulation has been insane, from like the most regulation happy administration since well before Carter.
But let's put some numbers behind this, right? For a moment. Fabs are 30% cheaper to make in Asia than the United States for a variety of reasons. This money is here to close the gap. That's what the money's
Right,
for.
right,
Close
right.
that gap. If I throw in a bunch of environmental regulations,
Yeah,
which can cost 5 to 10%, like can basically
right.
lower that, they shrink that, they sort of add 5 to 10% of costs. Really, really high. Those environmental regulations are terrible. They
Yeah.
really do hold things back. That's the one that you should care about. The profit takes back are the one you should care about. The labor law stuff is the ones you should care about. I don't know if Trump is going to do much about the labor laws because he does have unions as a strong backer now, but he doesn't care about the environment, and I think and I love that about him. So I like that. Like that's good. That's going to be the thing that's going to really dealing with the sort of I would say financialization of some of these subsidies and how they're administered is really going to be a huge component. And I think that what we should take an attitude of this is really my big point. Here's how you can make. Can I go into? Here's what I would do to make it work.
Yeah, yeah. No, go ahead.
Here's what you should do to make it work. One,
And then I have a very dumb question, but like, what should we do?
the thing the Biden administration didn't do was not only did they strap a lot of regulations onto it to make it more costly, but they also, and it's really the Democrats in Congress who did this in the Biden administration, but they also didn't shovel money. The industrial policy is about speed and not, and just,
Right.
it's just about speed. It's you can just do things sort of attitude towards giving people money, shoveling people money. And the Biden administration had a bunch of people who would be like, well, did you fill out Form 256A? Ooh, well, now it's going to be held up for another month. And that was the problem. The Biden
Yeah.
administration didn't release a lot of the money. This money was set aside and then never released. That's the issue. They just didn't give it out fast enough. Trump should streamline everything and start throwing money. He should have every chip CEO in a room and he should be throwing money at them left and right. And that's what he should be doing. And he should not care what they're doing. And he should just make sure they're not doing dividends and whatever. But that's really what he should be doing. No regulation, go hard. Number two, get rid of those environmental regulations. And number three, and this is important, throw tariffs in there to make sure that Samsung and TSMC behave.
Right.
That's not as nice and that's not as pleasant, but that is 100% what you need to do.
Okay. So, dumb question. And this is a question that I've always had and have sort of always felt too ashamed to say out loud because it sounds really dumb, which is, what are the chips for? In other words, we're building a giant chip factory in Arizona. What chips is it going to make? Where are the chips going to go? So, in other words, so a couple things. Number one, there are very many different types of chips. The chips that's in my, advanced Apple computer is very different from the chip in my car that tells me I need to change the oil, right? That's number one. And presumably they're manufactured differently so that there's no such thing as a chip factory, presumably. There's like different types of manufacturing processes and so on and so forth. So that's number one. And number two, chips are integrated in supply chains, right? You're making a computer, you're making a car, and like the car company and the computer company buy the chip that they need for the car or the computer or the missile or the plane or the whatever. It's not just I'm building a generic chip factory and then it's just like I recall reading
Let's
an article about how they were just going to ship the chips back to Asia so that they could be put into computer to be then shipped back over the US. So again, very deliberately dumb question, but like,
let's
where are the chips going?
yeah. So let's dig into this. I'm going to give you the simplest two by two that you can think about. There's analog, there's digital,
Okay.
there's high node, there's low node.
Okay, well, explain that at a sixth grade
Analog
level.
is signals processing, right? Analog chips are the goal of an analog chip is to take a wave that I'm getting when I'm sending out some sort of packet of information and turning that into a digital signal, right? So I filter, I filter, I filter. Then I have a thing called an analog to digital converter, and then at the back, and I basically take that analog signal and I turn it, which is turned into a voltage signal, and I turn it into a digital signal,
Right.
and then I'm done. That's all that I need to do. But these chips are extremely different. Now, when we say the word, and they're designed differently, and they have different physics, and they have different materials. Sometimes they're not even made with silicon. Sometimes they're going to be made with gallium or germanium, silicon, germanium, and gallium arsenide or gallium nitride specifically, when they're really, really high powered. That's analog. When we say digital, we mean ones and zeros. We mean CPUs, we mean GPUs, we mean the chips that we think about when we think about chips most of the time. Now, these are have different physics. In fact, the physics there is that they're really, really, really tiny. The node sizes to be effective tend to be quite small. And they're not tiny in area, they're actually quite large, but they are the nodes, the transistors themselves are quite small because you can do lots and lots of digital processing. Think about how you actually multiply a matrix digitally. You are doing many, many, many computations very, very quickly. And that is why digital chips tend to be, you know, low node size at the cutting edge.
This is
And
one of the few podcasts where you probably haven't lost half the audience when you said multiply a matrix. Go ahead.
great, good. But like that's why digital chips are low node. They tend to be low node, but there are high node digital chips, and they are the sort of the different variety, and they are manufactured extremely differently. So let's talk about high node, low node. There are lagging nodes and leading nodes. This is generally the phrase. High node means that I am is the transistors are a little larger, 14 nanometers, 28 nanometers. You might see these in FPGAs, which are used in most machine controls. So you see a lot of those in your cars and a lot of those in mechanical devices and industrial devices and things like that, control systems. You'll see a lot of them in missiles and you see a lot of them in weapons as well. FPGAs are very insecure, and don't buy Chinese FPGAs and put them in missiles. To anyone watching this podcast, don't do it. Um, but um, the the truth is that those are digital. Those are a little bit higher node. Low node stuff is like the thing you hear about when you hear 3 nanometer, 2 nanometer EUV. That's they're actually not 2 nanometers. They're it's just that they consume power as if they were 2 nanometers. It's a very, very large misconception. But those require heavy duty technology, EUV, a lot of different fab work, high capital expenses, and that's what TSMC is doing. Now, when we talk about what the CHIPS Act is for, um, and I've written about this, most of it is being targeted towards the low node digital chips that make AI work under the assumption that in order for the United States, that AI will be the unlock to all global
Okay,
economic
so
growth
hang on.
forward.
This is fascinating. So the factories made under the Chips Act are there to make chips specifically for AI? Is that what you're
No,
saying?
no, 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 no. We
Okay,
are
that would be too
focusing
smart. Okay, sorry.
Okay, so we are focusing the CHIPS Act efforts for better or worse to fund building low node fabs that are digital because CPUs and GPUs are the engines of the very high end
Right.
chips that we need that will be what we use to power OpenAI's next generation model. And that
Yeah.
is what we care about. We care about a lot of other things, but that's the thing
So
that's the
is that's what the factory in Arizona is for?
exactly
It's to make advanced GPUs for AI.
not just for AI, for everything.
But
For the
okay.
AMD Ryzen chip that sits on for the AMD chips that sit on F-35s, you need low node digital chips too. For some very complex missile systems, you'll need them too. There is money going to other fabs that do other things. BAE, in this very weird moment, was the recipient of,
BAE British Aerospace?
yes, British Aerospace was was the winner of the award for tons and tons for like their gallium arsenide, gallium nitride process in Nashua, New Hampshire. Um, People thought
So
this
BA
was
so for people who don't know, BAE is stands for British Aerospace. It's the biggest British defense company, and I say British because it's actually owned by Lockheed Martin. So this is a very US UK kind of thing. Not
BAE.
not not majority, but they have like 40-45% of the capital, which and the rest is publicly traded, which means de facto they're controlled by Lockheed Martin.
the truth of the matter is that BAE makes much more money in the United States than they make in the UK.
Well, of course, like if the U.S. taxpayer is the most profligate buyer of defense equipment.
I think
Uh, well,
Thales
per capita, it's probably Saudi Arabia, but like you
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right. But by the way, the French companies do fine in France. Like some of the French companies do fine in France. They have U.S. I think that the Americans truly don't trust French weapons. We think that French FPGAs are probably equally dangerous. I'm convinced of this. This is my conspiracy theory is that um, uh, France is the country to watch out for. But like yeah,
it's probably not wrong.
yeah.
Uh,
But the
this is the master plan. You buy our weapons, and then we push the
finally
button, and we get Louisiana back.
right. Russia gets Alaska back. France gets Louisiana back. Um, uh, the but yeah. So like this is where things are getting divided along. There are other chip fabs that are being funded. It's not just but the big push is going to be towards low node digital, and I think that that's the right thing. That's the leverage. The real worry is that is what we lose if we lose Taiwan. If we lose Taiwan, we lose some gallium arsenide chips. Win Semi being a big producer of them, but it doesn't matter because we have Northrop, we have Corvo, we have Wolfspeed, and they're better.
Right.
If we lose Taiwan, we lose like some of the RF UMC. I think we use UMC for example, but we have Global Foundries, which is an American company. It is half American, half Singaporean, but it's an American company for the most part. We're fine. If we lose Taiwan, we lose digital, we lose TSMC, and that is all we care about.
Right. Okay. So I'm just gonna press this point. So we build this amazing factory in the US, and let's say the factory is amazing. Let's say everything goes fine and it produces the world's best AI chips. Okay. XAI or OpenAI or Anthropic or Perplexity or whoever, you know, the data center that runs the model doesn't run on chips. The chips go into
Yes. So let's
specially designed computers, which go into specially designed racks, which go into specially designed rooms with specially designed cooling systems.
you're missing a
And
big
and
part.
like
You're
and
missing
like
the funnest
if
part.
those things are assembled in Asia, we actually haven't gained anything in terms of strategic independence. And like that's low wage work. Like
Yeah,
screwing the
but
motherboard into the thing is low wage work, which we're not going to bring back to the US.
let's pause because I think this is a big jump. Number one, the highest value add part of any electronics product is the chips
Yes, but
by
if you
far.
can't put it in anything, it's worthless.
So first of all, this is not true. The United States. Oh, no, no, but I'm just like no. I'm like
Okay, okay, fine.
let's go ahead.
No,
Let's go ahead and talk about
I'm
how
asking the dumb questions on
no, no,
purpose. So
no.
explain to me why I'm dumb.
First thing first. Actually, the chip comes out and it's just a bare die. I need to put that thing in a package, and that package is a non-trivial task. Packaging is actually done. Malaysia, Singapore dominate the packaging industry, but the recent big player behind the scenes, the Chinese are beginning to dominate packaging. Actually, many chips that are produced in TSMC may find their way back to China when they're packaged. Now, the Chinese won't be able to tamper with them during the packaging stage as easily as they would if they were produced in China itself. But indeed, they will make it back to China, or they will make it back to Chinese-owned factories in Malaysia to be packaged, to be tested, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that is a fact. Testing and packaging are not something the United States is good at. There's like two packaging houses you can go to in the United States, and they're like way more expensive than the Malaysians are. A story that I've heard, it's a total anecdote, is that the CHIPS Act people go to Singapore and they walk into the Singapore Semiconductor Industry Association, and they say, "We've got the plan. We're all good." And the Singaporeans are like, "What about packaging?" And the Biden administration people were like, "Oh shit, we forgot about packaging." um, uh, so to an extent, you're right. It's
Okay,
only
so you may or may not want to buy French missiles, but you definitely need to buy French civil servants because, like, the French civil servants do not forget stuff like this. Anyway, go on.
I actually Singaporeans yes. If we
And
import
Neither do Singaporeans. Yes, you would do very well to buy Singaporean civil servants for sure.
yes, but whatever the case is, yes, this is an issue. But and so is board bring up, right? When you have to put it on a board, you have to do the you have to put it on the board. You have to get it ready, and you have to pack, and you have to do the whole process of what's called bring up, and that's a thing. But I'm going to make a point. That stuff for the national security stuff, that stuff already happened in the United States. There are a massive ecosystem of PCB people. So in a war with China, we can scale that up rather quickly, and we'll be okay because you can do it in you can do it in LA, you can do it in Orange County. It does happen already. You can do it all across the United States for defense infrastructure. We've already put both packaging and PCB in the United States. So as a first order, from a national security reason, it's not the risk. We don't have low no digital we can really do feasibly in the United States. So we needed to do it. We needed the CHIPS Act. But the PCBs, the packaging, that sort of the testing, easy to scale up,
Okay,
cheap to
so
scale
what
up,
you're saying
and we
is
couldn't do it for
that
NASA
we
anyway.
already had all of the other pieces in the US. What we missed was the very
Yes,
high note chips. But
yes.
we've already got all the other stuff so that if tomorrow there's a war in China, we can make, server racks in the US and like assemble everything in the US.
Yeah, well, actually, not even.
It would be really expensive presumably, but we would be able to do it.
Flextronics. I don't know if you know this company, Flextronics. They're a contract manufacturer for electronics. They do Cisco. They do a lot of
Right.
stuff. They have stuff in Asia, obviously. And they have stuff in Hungary, Asia, a lot in Malaysia, I think, and where they've done a lot of their manufacturing actually is in Mexico. People don't
Right.
want to think about this a lot, but I think it's the city of Monterey is as wealthy as South Korea now. I don't know if it's the state of Leon or the
No,
city of
I
Monterey.
we had an article about this in the briefing a couple days ago. Not a whole article, but an item about this. Like, this is good. Like, bringing manufacturing from Asia to Mexico is good
Yes, it is.
because we have physical access to Mexico and don't have physical access to Asia. And like, this is, like a big secret of like German manufacturing might. Well, the might is not looking so good now, but it was looking good for decades. Is they do a lot of their manufacturing in Poland actually. The
Yes.
final assembly is in Germany, but like they're doing a lot of low wage stuff in Poland, and like that's good.
Yeah. Funny story. I was in a meeting with for my last company. I sold software to BASF. BASF is this big
Yes,
German company.
giant
I'm in a meeting.
German
They have a
chemical
factory.
conglomerate.
Yes, many. In a grand irony of history, many of the German factories are in Silesia. Silesia is a big industrial center
Yes,
of
Poland and the Czech Republic.
in the Czech Republic. So a lot of stuff has ended up there. Uh, all Silesian cities have
Maybe they will want the factories back.
yeah, all these towns have German names, and we're in a meeting, and I watched a bunch of German chemical execs try to pronounce one of these Polish words, one of these Polish towns, and they just went. They struggled for like 5 minutes, and they just went Breslau, and I was like,
Yeah, because they all have German names.
they all have German names. They know the German names. Um, uh, but yes, but no, but that is a secret of German manufacturing, might, and and we do have NAFTA, and Trump isn't getting rid of NAFTA because Lighthizer policies will be hurt China.
Yes.
Um, this is important to realize. We
Well, Lighthizer not going into the administration, but a lot of people who worked for him are.
okay, sure. I didn't really.
That's the last thing I've read. Um,
Okay. Um, we can talk about what. By the way, this is a two-player game. We should talk about that for a moment
yeah.
if we have time. But yes, Mexico, in terms of the other aspects of electronics manufacturing, is going to be the place that we go to, and they're fine at it. Mexican manufacturing is high productivity.
Yeah.
Mexican manufacturing has educated labor force now. There's a lot of engineers coming out of Mexican universities in northern Mexico that are fine and good and
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
competitive.
and like, I mean, Mexico is a very funny. I mean, it's a very funny country. Like, people have the stereotype of like this sort of horrible gang civil war place, and that's true in some places, but not at all everywhere. And like, you have parts of Mexico that are very fine in terms of security, and you have parts of Mexico that are just very developed. Like, you have, millions of people in Mexico City who take the subway and like go into offices and work as like software designers or accountants or lawyers or whatever. It's not beaches and drug trafficking.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Actually, yeah, and oil. It's a lot of oil too. I think
Yes,
I think
and a lot of
is
Mexicans are patriotic, which means that you have a lot of Mexicans who theoretically could come to the US and make more money but don't.
yeah, right. The um, yeah, I think
That's the flip side of they're not sending their best people.
yes. One thing I want to
Anyway,
note.
so the point is,
Yeah, sorry.
bringing, putting a lot of low wage but sort of, or low value added but strategically sensitive or strategically important manufacturing in Mexico is actually a win. And it's a national security win, and it's an economic win, because I mean, the basic sort of Ricardian argument about competitive advantage and so on, I mean, there's clearly some truth to it, right? It's good if you have like a specialization, and if people focus on what they're best at and so on and so forth. The problem is, doing it an ocean away, and giving it to countries that A, hate you, and B, have like totally different legal systems and economic basis. That's the But in terms, if you look at the difference between a country like Germany and Poland, joking aside, it's basically the same culture.
Yes,
One is middle income and one is high income. It's not like the richest country and the poorest country.
and in 10 years
And
they'll be
so on and so
reversed.
forth. It's the same with the US and Mexico. Sorry, I'm ranting. Go ahead.
No, 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 no. But I
Like,
think that
I'm making the argument for why, this is good, and this is actually a moderate position. We're not saying, oh, we need to bring back every single job to America. It's like, no, just like, let's rebalance a little bit so that we don't have these crazy risks, and we don't have this completely skewed marketplace. Okay, I'm done now. Go ahead.
but I think that the point I always make is that the assumption was always that China was going to liberalize with free trade. We made this assumption.
Yes.
We did not realize.
Yes, and
I
that
think
did not work at all.
it did not work at all. But more to the point, we made an assumption that they saw trade differently. We made an assumption that they saw trade the same way as us.
Yes.
This is a country that has had a tradition of intense mercantilism,
Yes.
and it's a communist country. They are still communists, and they're
Yes.
run by company. They're run by people who believe in sort of what's uh, like the tenets of what materialism, historical materialism,
Dialectical materialism.
dialectical
Yeah,
materialism.
yeah, and like Xi Jinping, like, specifically mandated the teaching of Marx and of dialectical materialism in the Communist Party school. Like, he's a sincere Marxist. Like,
But
seriously.
yeah, I know. But the other thing is that they saw trade as always strategic. They saw trade in a strategic light from day one, and they continue to do that. And I think that people are like, well, we woke up in 2018 and suddenly China wanted to be the regional hegemon, and that's not true. China wanted to be the regional hegemon since 1949, or since no,
Oh,
China
since
desired,
5000 BC.
right. China desires to be the regional hegemon, and they've said it very clearly for God knows how many years. And so we are in a position now where we gave a lot of economic leverage to a rising power that does not have an interest in having the United States have economic access to their region.
Yep.
We, in chips, to bring it back, The Chinese have dumped billions, much more than the CHIPS Act, into their own fabs.
Yeah.
SMIC gets, and they don't care about profits. China is currently flooding the world with cheap, high node analog and digital chips at an incredibly rapid rate that is a clear play to gain economic leverage by dominating these markets. And it goes so much bigger. They are flooding the world with chips. They're going to flood. Huawei's going to flood the world with their pretty competitive digital chips, and and then they build their smart cities, which are all integrated onto Chinese hardware. And then the smart cities can't interoperate with everything else, and they control your port. They control your port's hardware. They control everything down to the digital, the electrons that are running through your port systems in your urban areas. And this is like not a conspiracy. This is the plan. They're trying to gain economic leverage, maybe not over the United States, but certainly over their neighbors in Southeast Asia and other parts of the world.
Definitely the EU, and
Definitely
again, we can
EU.
talk about Germany's role in all of that.
Yeah, bad is. But the truth is that the Chinese are
That's a
dumping.
whole nother thing.
Right, but the Chinese are dumping money into their fabs. They don't care about the profits of their fabs. They don't care about how well they run. They only care that they produce, so that China can gain economic leverage over certain areas of the market. So China can flood the market, and this has the United States. One of the things that the United States did under Trump, which was a incredibly important thing, was they flushed most of the Chinese chips out of our defense ecosystem. So we really got that we were at like 20-30% of chips in defense systems were Chinese. We flushed a lot of them out. We forced Qualcomm and other military providers to tell us who was making what and
Yeah.
where their chips were coming from. This was really important. We're going to continue to do it, but frankly, we need to do two things. And this is a separate rant. One, 300% tariffs on Chinese chips. They can't sell them. No, you think I'm ridiculous, but like we just.
I don't think I don't think you're ridiculous. I think it's I mean the sort of I make the sort of libertarian devil's advocate argument, and Policy Sphere, as a media company, has an editorial line that's friendly to all factions in the right. And I think that the libertarians make a lot of good points when it comes to economics, when it comes to public choice, when it comes to government incompetence. I'm a big fan of Hayek and all of that. But like when it comes to geostrategic com- competition, like I don't I don't care because it's us versus them. And it
Yeah.
really is. And by us, I mean the West. I mean North America and Europe versus China is, I don't know if it's existential as such, but it's quasi existential. And at some point, and like you have to do whatever you need to do. And that is actually the liberty maximizing outcome, because if, China ends up owning all of the systems that run our lives, that means that they own our governments, and then it's game over.
Yeah, I think one thing to realize is that China triumphant is a real risk that we are facing economically and militarily, and this is something.
Yes.
And a China triumphant is going to mean that we don't. Are we allowed to hate on the Germans on this podcast?
You're not allowed, you're encouraged.
Right. Like German automotive companies have had this policy of every time of just like trying to double down and triple down on China and Chinese manufacturing every time, and it's like watching. It's like they have Alzheimer's to the last time they did it. Um, they will put VW factories in China. They will expand BASF factories in China, and then they find that all their IP is stolen and everything's gone, and they're competed
Yep.
out. And their
Yeah, yeah,
products
yeah,
are.
yeah. No, it's an absolute disaster. It's as disastrous as and as stupid as, in the sense of like you sort of break your brain trying to figure out how ostensibly smart people could do something so stupid, but it is as stupid and brainless as their energy policy.
But a world in which China is triumphant will be one in which Germany can't. It's a colonial relationship, right? A
Yes.
colonial relationship between France and Vietnam or Britain and Malaysia was one in which Britain would resource extract from the
Yes.
colony, and they would send back the finished goods
Yes.
to sell to them. The China triumphant world is one in which China, Europe or Asia or other countries in Asia or America have to accept cheap Chinese goods or accept Chinese value add goods,
Yep.
Chinese finished
Yep.
goods, and we don't have power to export to their market or
Yep.
even East Asian markets as a whole. It's a very scary world. It means the economic death of most liberal democracies,
Yeah.
and it is going to be a world in which they will then begin to, in many ways, dictate. Yeah, they'll be able to dictate
Yeah,
policy.
absolutely. But that's, I mean, you were joking about NBA players, but like that's absolutely the future we would be in, which is that we wouldn't be under like direct Chinese communist rule, but essentially we would be so dependent on China that whenever someone did something that displeases Beijing in France and Germany, in America, in Britain, in Italy, they would pick up the phone, and then something would happen because we would have no choice, because we would be completely dependent on them economically and technologically.
Yeah, but I think that their East Asian neighbors, the
That's
Southeast
that's a
Asian,
possible future. That's a
yeah,
possible
Southeast Asia.
future.
By the way, in Southeast Asia, it's not a possible future. Southeast Asia faces a real drastic choice. In
Right.
Northeast and Southeast Asia, Japan may be able to get a nuke, and no, actually Japan too. Southeast and Northeast Asia face a real choice wherein you already see this in Cambodia and Laos and probably Myanmar after they in a couple years, and increasingly Thailand, increasingly Malaysia, where the Chinese government has so much economic leverage that they are simply establishing colonial relationships where there's the GLCs, the government linked companies in Malaysia are being
Which is
starved
how
out.
the Chinese empire dealt with its neighbors for
Yes.
millennia, with sort of the sort of interruption of like civil war where you have 100 million people dying, but like when it um
They're
yes,
going right
that's
now.
that's how they regard the proper functioning of the world, which is, they sit at the center, and every other country is sort of dependent on them and has a relationship, a sort of fealty to them.
Yes, and I think that the what you see now in Malaysia is that the government linked companies. Malaysia used to have a relationship where it was that you had the Chinese run government linked company or Chinese run private entrepreneurs and then the government linked companies, and everyone was getting a payout. And suddenly these Malaysian native companies, both the private ones and the public and the government linked ones, are getting crushed because the routers from China are flooding their markets, and the Malaysians can do nothing about it.
Yep.
And the Chinese want the rubber, they want the IP, and they want to extract that from Malaysia, and they're just going to bombard Malaysia with finished goods. And
Yep.
you're looking at a Malaysia, probably Thailand, um, Cambodia, and Laos that are essentially dependencies of China. The
Yep.
Vietnamese um, will never allow that, and they'll with their dying breaths um, resist anything like that. But
Vietnamese nationalism might save us in the end.
yes,
How's that for a
yeah,
a plot twist at the end of history?
yes. But yeah, no, I think that this is but this is yeah, I think bringing it back to chips, like this is the most important product on the planet.
Yeah.
This just is. Modern militaries are going to function on this stuff.
Yes.
And I can't emphasize this enough. Like people want to know, where does this intersect with national power? Why can't we just all get along and buy things from each other? Modern military power, the ability to build autonomous systems which are going to make modern militaries win or lose, are going to rely on these things. And if we don't get control of this supply chain, we will lose, and we will no longer be, and I say we in the United States, but France too, like the West will no longer be militarily competitive. And it's a very game over sort of situation.
All right. Well, on that hopeful note,
uh, yes.
Thank you very much for doing this. As I told you, time flies very fast. You were like, we had a chat before we started recording. You were like, "Oh, how many topics do you want me to cover?" And I was like, "You'll see, it goes by very fast." And
This
so
is
we
a
were
lot.
planning for
Yeah.
an hour. We've done 1 hour and 20, and like we could keep talking for another hour.
Yes.
But I do have to end it at some point.
Uh,
Uh, would you like to make a final point?
yeah. My last point is the
Subscribe to
following.
your Substack.
Go www.glinert.co is my Substack. You can go subscribe to it. You can follow me on Twitter. It's just my name. Um, my final point is like to any Trump incoming people who are watching this, like, do not get hoodwinked by the Cato Institute people. This policy is working. Um, I mean it. Like this policy is working. It's going to be about what I think Trump can do. That's amazing. Is he can, and I say this to everyone who's a concerned citizen about this. Use tariffs when you can. Use them strategically. Use the instruments at your disposal to make this as easy as possible, and also shovel money at these things. Do not ask as many questions. Ask some questions, but not many. And make this an easy thing to do, and you will get a successful industrial policy. And the benefits roll over. We now have an industry. Last point, bit of a tangent. There is an essential piece which no one wants, which is like less pleasant but is important. Um, as we move forward in this immigration debate, this stuff is going to need a lot of high skilled immigrants. I think an important point for Republicans to make, as we and Democrats to make and agree upon, is um, the proper balance between high skilled and low skilled immigrants is going to be something that needs to be a
Right.
very deep discussion, and it's going to be essential. And I really, really, really hope that Republicans realize the importance of high skilled immigration, and as they negotiate, keep that in mind and not
Yeah.
give that up. But that's my last point.
All right.
All right, I'm
So
done.
we end every podcast on a traditional question, and that question is, which is not a question, it's an order. Recommend a book. It can be anything, fiction, nonfiction, anything at all, as long as it's not in your area of expertise.
Yes. Okay. Um, I'm gonna open up my Kindle because this is where I keep because I not in my area of expertise. Um, actually, relevant book to the conversation we're having. There is a book called The Other Great Game. It's a
Yes.
history. It's not a
I've heard of this book, but I don't know what it is. So
okay. It's
explain.
not like it's a book about the great game between Japan, Britain, and Russia and China in East Asia over the fate of Northeast Asia, Korea. Um, the point that I like to think about is that like for the the question and the contest over who will have regional hegemony in East Asia is and was one of the most important questions, other than regional hegemony in Europe, for the last and it has it, for the last couple hundred years.
Yeah.
Japan and Russia and France and Britain. Do you know France almost colonized Korea?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And Japan.
Yeah, France. You ended up with Vietnam, but think of how good Korean food could have been. Um, uh, but like it's good, but it could have been so much better. But like you do have this contest. It's a great book. I recommend it. It's not long and it's just an interesting history. All right.
That's a great recommendation. All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your time. This was absolutely fascinating.